Hi class, today we are going to talk about various theories of truth. This is a very important question. Every day we're trying to figure out what is true and what is false. We have to do it in very small ways, like listening to our children, and hearing why the fight occurred. It can be large things like, is our politicians lying or telling the truth? When I read an article about science or something, is this true or not? Should I believe this person or not? So determining whether things are true or false it pervades our existence. It's a huge issue in philosophy. So we're going to be covering it this week. We've been talking about knowledge. Knowledge and truth are related, but they're somewhat different. For instance, you might know all there is to know about the Bible, the books, the content, the stories, the characters, the commandments. You could know all about it. You have knowledge. But does that tell you anything about whether what is in the Bible is true or not? Does that tell you that the Bible is true just because you have knowledge of it? I might know all about the Book of Mormon or the Bhagavad Gita or the Quran. Lots of knowledge, but determining whether that stuff is true is a separate philosophical question, a separate epistemological issue. It's the same with history. Gaining knowledge of history and knowing whether that knowledge represents the truth is a separate question. We could go on and on. So we're looking at truth, and typically truth is some kind of a relationship between beliefs, so these internal beliefs, and the things that I say, right, the propositions I make, some relationship between that and the world. Right? So if I hold a certain belief and it matches the way things actually are in the world, that relationship we might call correspondence. Right? There's a correspondence between beliefs and the actual world. We say, oh, that's true. That's one way of thinking about the relationship between beliefs and the world. And truth is typically some kind of relationship. Some argue that the relationship should be a coherence, not a correspondence. Some argue that the relationship should be pragmatic. We're going to talk about these three relationships, ways of connecting my beliefs and the things I say to reality, to the facts, to the world, right? And truth it's somewhere in that relationship. So it's not quite the same as gaining knowledge, right? So as we start, what is the nature of truth? And there's different ways of looking at it. So I'm going to indicate three ways we might think of the nature of truth. Okay? So number one, truth is objective in nature, and human beings can know that truth objectively. Some of you don't know what I mean when I say objective or subjective, so let me try to clarify. If we say the nature of truth is objective, that means truth is black and white. It is universal. It does not change from person to person or culture to culture. The truth is what the truth is, regardless of what we think or say or do about it. Okay? So it's a stable sort of universal view of truth. So this view number one says truth is objective, stable, universal, and as humans, we have access to that truth in an objective way. Through sense experience, through reason, through divine revelation, through some combination of those things, we have access to the truth. Okay? Another way of thinking about the nature of truth, right, the very nature, is to say truth itself is objective, universal, cutting through time and culture, and it is not dependent on our beliefs or opinions. However, we as humans are limited in our knowledge of that truth. And therefore, truth is objective, but humans can only know that truth subjectively from our own perspective. When I say the word subjective, right, truth is subjective, we can mean various things. It can be a very radical view of subjective, like every individual creates truth for themselves. Almost no philosopher holds to that view, by the way. The radical kind of subjectivity. Then there's more moderate forms of subjectivity that say things like groups of people construct truth, religious groups, political groups, right, others, and it's more of a group relativism. a group subjectivity. But it basically means if you say truth is subjective, it has to be subject to something else. If you say truth is relative, it has to be relative to something. So we often say truth is relative to time period, truth is relative to groups, truth is relative to the individual, and those are all different ways of thinking about subjectivity or relativism. In this view, truth itself is objective, universal. But again, humans are limited, so we can't know the truth objectively, and so we only have a particular subjective perspective of this objective truth. Some people might think of this like God. God exists objectively, right? God is true whether you believe in God or not. God exists and is present to all people as a universal and absolute. However, under this number 2 view, it would say, but humans are limited, so we don't have access to God. We don't know God fully. We don't fully understand God or are equipped to know that. All we can experience is an aspect of God, a very subjective, limited perspective of God, and that's the best we can do. We don't have access because of our limitations to God in total. That might be one way of thinking about this number 2 view. So number 1 and number 2 both say truth is objective, truth is universal, truth is stable. Number 1 says humans can know the truth objectively. The other is more pessimistic when it comes to human knowledge, and that humans can only have a particular perspective of that truth. Another example might help. If there's a car accident, and there are 5 witnesses to that car accident, how many perspectives do you think there will be? I'm asking you, right? I'm guessing there's probably going to be 5 slightly different versions of the same story, depending on when you saw it, what angle you had, were you driving, were you on the side of the road, did you just hear it, did you see it? From number 1, the idea is, look, something happened here. 2 cars collided. The truth is objective. The truth of this car accident can't be changed based on human opinion. It is what it is, objective. And the argument is, if we study the scene enough, we talk to enough eyewitnesses, we can actually know the truth of this car accident objectively, know exactly what happened. Under number 2, it's slightly different. Yes, the truth of the car accident is objective. There's nothing we can do to change it. Our opinions don't make it different. It is what it is objectively. However, we'll never know exactly what happened because every human perspective is limited, it is finite, and so we're only going to get a kind of subjective approximation of the objective truth of the car accident. So that's sort of the difference here. Then view number 3 simply says there is no objective truth. Truth, the nature of truth is subjective. That truth is essentially a construct, a human construct. We create truth. We construct it and mold it and make it what it is. Through our language, our categories, our cultures, our experiences, we sort of construct it. But there's no, talking about objective truth is meaningless because how would any person claim to know what the objective truth was? Everything we have is a perspective that we've been given, inherited, and that we've partially constructed on our own. 3 different ways of thinking about truth. Again, when we say truth, truth is a particular kind of relationship between beliefs and propositions, things I believe and things I say, and reality. Different theories of truth argue for different relationships between beliefs and reality. So truth is that relationship between beliefs and reality, and different truth theories argue that that relationship should look one way versus another. The relationship should shift, for instance, from correspondence to coherence to pragmatism and whatnot. I hope this is making sense. Usually what happens is students start very fuzzy, and then slowly things get clearer over time. So I'm hoping that the picture is becoming a little bit clearer as we go. When I say theory of truth, it can be a little bit daunting, right? It feels like theory of truth. But the reality is we all have a particular theory of truth. When you're trying to figure out whether something's true or not, there are certain criteria you use, right? To say, this is why I think this is the truth, and this is why I think that's false. So we all are using one already. Philosophy is here to help us use better criteria, to help us be more consistent in the way we determine truth, and to kind of be a watchdog, right? So that we don't just do this willy-nilly. So we're going to cover 3 theories that view truth somewhat differently. The first is called the correspondence theory of truth. Okay? The relationship between my beliefs and reality should be one of correspondence. The correspondence theory has been around a long time, but Bertrand Russell often gets credit in textbooks and whatnot because he creates a very clear, more modern formulation. So it's often his essay that is cited. You can see the dates that he lived here. He was a British empiricist. The moment you hear the word empiricist, you should already have some sense of where he's going to go with this and the take he'll have on truth, because we know a little bit about empiricism. So here's how the correspondence theory defines truth. When you're writing your reflections and your CAP papers, if you use the correspondence theory of truth, you must put the definition in. Give me a short example. Let me know that you know what it means and how it would work, okay? Here's the definition. Correspondence. A belief or proposition is true if it corresponds, the relationship here, corresponds to the way things actually are. If it corresponds to the facts. If it corresponds to reality, okay? So something's true if it corresponds to the facts. This is very much like the scientific method. I have a belief, that's like a hypothesis. If there is evidence to show that my belief corresponds to reality, if it can be verified, then we say my belief is true. Or if I say something, that's a hypothesis, if there's enough evidence to show and verify what I say is true, if it corresponds to the facts, then it's true. And of course, if it doesn't, then it's false. Right? Cut and dry. In this view of truth, with the correspondence theory, it's number 1. The nature of truth is objective, and humans can know it objectively. So remember, the 3 natures of truth, this is option 1. Correspondence theory believes truth is objective, and humans can know it objectively. The connection to empiricism. How do we correspond our beliefs and the things we say to reality? How do we know that they correspond? How do we know this objectively? Sense experience. Remember, scientific method here. The correspondence theory is very much a kind of empiricism. Let's see if we can get the evidence. Let's make the evidence public. Let's see if it agrees with other people's sense experience. And if it does, we say it is true objectively. Right? An example would be something like this. Someone comes to me and says, Dr. Bankard, your car is parked in a handicapped spot. Boom. That's a belief that's now turned into a proposition, a sentence, right? A statement, you are parked in a handicapped spot. The correspondence theory takes that and says, okay, is this true or not? Is this true or false? Well, I'm probably going to have to go outside and look to see where my car is parked. Oh my gosh, there's a handicap sign there. There's a blue paint on the ground. And then if I don't feel comfortable, right, maybe that's not enough for me, maybe I'll ask a few other people, right? Do you see the same thing I do? Do you know if this is a handicapped spot or not? If there's agreement and our senses tell us it's true, we say, aha, that statement was objectively true and we just determined the truth, right? We did it through sense experience. We verified the hypothesis. Fact, I'm parked in a handicapped spot. And this is the way the correspondence theory of truth works in any given example, right? So you name it. A friend calls. Joe, I really think your wife is cheating on you, right? Oh boy, there's a belief, there's a proposition, right? I'm impacted by it, and okay, well, what I'm going to do, I'm going to probably talk to my wife and ask her. Let's say she says no, but there's still a lot of evidence that she's coming home late from work, distant, all these things. Well, that might be enough. So maybe I've got to, find other evidence to see, is this true or false? Because again, either true or false. It's objective. I can know it objectively. At some point, maybe I hire a private investigator. I do whatever I can until I know one way or the other this is true or false. Now, of course, I'm not going to hire a private eye right away. That would be a horrible thing. I'm going to talk to her. We're going to dialogue. I'm going to weigh the evidence available. And then at some point, I'm going to have to figure out whether this is true objectively or false objectively. It's going to be a lot of data gathering and whatnot. This is how the correspondence theory works over and over, right? Now, there are a lot of things where we just won't know the objective truth. And the correspondence theory says with those things, you withhold judgment. So if you can't tell whether something's true or false objectively, you say, I don't know what the truth is. Now, you can still have opinions. You can still have beliefs like, yeah, I don't really know, but I really believe X based on this evidence, but I don't know that it's true yet, right? So you can have beliefs, you can have opinions, but we only call things true, we only call things false when we have all the evidence and we know for sure, right, objectively. So again, a lot of withholding judgment. For those that are visual learners, you think of a person here, they've got a belief or they make a statement, and they've got to correspond it to the real world. And right here, I should have written the word correspond, right? This is the relationship. This is where the truth lies. If there's a correspondence, there's truth. If there's not a correspondence and the belief does not match the facts, does not match the real world, then it's false. So again, if my beliefs correspond to reality, then they are true. If they do not correspond to reality, they are false. The next theory of truth we're going to cover is the coherence theory. The person that often gets associated with the coherence theory of truth is Francis Bradley. Again, it predates him, but in textbooks and whatnot, he gives a more modern, sort of clear formulation. So he's often cited. You see his date there. And Francis Bradley is more of a Kantian and less of an empiricist, like the correspondence theory of truth. And so here's how the coherence theory defines truth, right? A belief or proposition is true if it is consistent, coherent with other true ideas, other things that we consider to be true, right? All of us have a system of belief. A worldview is another way of thinking about it. We have individual ones, we have collective ones, like religions have systems of belief, worldviews, cultures have them, right? And we use this to judge new information. If new information, new beliefs, new ideas, right, come to us and they fit with our system of belief, if they fit with our worldview, then we say that this new thing is true. It makes sense. It is self-supporting with the other stuff, right? It creates a nice network that fits together well. But if this new information contradicts or conflicts or creates tension with our worldview, then we reject it as false. So again, this is about, think of the coherence theory as like putting pieces of a puzzle together. And we interlock, right, and there's support, mutual support going around. And as the puzzle comes together, when new things fit in with that, we snap them in and we say, oh, this is true, this fits with our worldview. But if something new comes and collides with that, it doesn't fit, we can't place it into the puzzle, we put that aside as false, because we've got all these other interlocking components that make up our worldview, that we've used for a long time, that help us navigate our world and make decisions. So if something comes in that disrupts that, we tend to reject it as false. If something fits, we accept it as true. A couple things about the coherence theory. One, they adopt the second position when we talk about the nature of truth, right? So the coherence theory believes the nature of truth is objective, right? The nature of truth is universal. It's the same for everyone. It is black and white. However, the coherence theory argues we as humans are limited. We can't know that truth objectively. We can only experience and encounter that truth from a subjective angle, right? And so the nature of truth is objective. Humans' knowledge of that will always be somewhat subjective. So there's a difference there. In fact, Francis Bradley, the person here, and others suggest humans can never know reality as it really is, right? You can never get outside of your eyes. You can never get outside of your perspective to know reality as it truly is. You can only know reality as you see it, as you experience it, as you encounter it. If that's true, then the correspondence theory can't work. The correspondence theory is predicated on the belief that truth is objective and I can know that truth objectively. But if I can only see the world from my perspective and I can never get outside of it, to see things objectively, then the correspondence theory won't work, and therefore we move to the coherence theory. If you agree that you can only experience the world from your perspective and you can't get outside of that, from your group's perspective, your country's perspective, and whatnot, then the coherence theory might be for you. The second thing I want to say about it, the correspondence theory is an outward movement. I go from my beliefs, my propositions, and I see if they match the world. So I go outward to the world to judge. The coherence theory is an inward movement. Does new information, do these beliefs, this information I've been presented, do they cohere with my web of beliefs? Do they cohere with my worldview? I'm using these as synonyms, right? So it's an inward movement to see, does this new information really fit with everything else I know about the world? Does it cohere and make a greater whole? Is this connecting a bigger piece to the puzzle, right? Or does this conflict with my worldview? And that's how we determine whether something's true or false, whether it fits or not. But it's an internal movement rather than external movement. And here's the reason. People that argue for the coherence theory believe every person judges truth using their worldview. What else would you use to determine whether something's true or false, other than your perspective, the way you understand and see things, right? There's no other way to do it. So it's got to be an internal movement to use that worldview to judge truth. So the goal is to have the most consistent, clear, comprehensive worldview as possible. So if I want to get better at determining the truth, I've got to get better at structuring my worldview, my web of beliefs, my perspective. I've got to craft that, work on that so that I can now be a better judge regarding truth. So I have a little visual here of a web of beliefs, right? And what's important is that certain beliefs like these here are anchors. These are super important. They hold down the fort. And these might be beliefs that many of us hold, like my sense experience gives me valid information. Our concepts of space and time and how we move through it. Certain core beliefs might be things like God exists for certain people. That's a foundation, right? And then with those, we begin to construct the web. We build the puzzle around that. These beliefs are hard to shake because they're foundational to so many other things. And then we have peripheral beliefs that surround that fit. So something on the outside might be something as silly as, I believe it's 10:30 in the morning right now, right? And that's something that could easily change and not much else would be affected. Oh, it's not 10:30? Okay, I'll get rid of that belief and replace it with something else. But the core are foundational ones that would be really hard to change. If Bradley is right, the coherence theory is right, and it's impossible for one to experience reality as it is, then the correspondence theory will not work. It seems that the definition of truth must either change or the correspondence theory is in real trouble, right? A few steps to the coherence theory. So if I'm going to apply the coherence theory, I've got a few steps. One, if a new piece of information comes along that fits or coheres with my web of beliefs, with my worldview, then I say it's true. If a new piece of information comes along that does not fit, that conflicts, that creates incoherence, I reject it as false. That's step one. If this were the only step, it would be purely subjective. Truth or falsity would be determined purely by my own beliefs, and that's it. But there's a second step to the coherence theory. We must stay open-minded. New information might arise that forces us to change our web of beliefs. So initially, I might reject something as false right from the get-go. Someone says your wife's cheating on you. This is like a core belief of mine that my wife loves me and is faithful. I'm going to say that's false. You must be mistaken. That can't be right. I reject it as false. I'm using my web of beliefs to make a judgment about truth or falsity. However, I have to be open-minded. I might start to think, man, things have been tough. She has been coming home late. I have caught her in a lie or two. I talked to her. I'm not convinced. Over time, new information might arise where it becomes a situation like, oh my gosh, I have to change my view. My worldview must change, even at a fundamental level, because of the new evidence. Maybe I walk in and encounter her cheating on me or something, and that's it. My worldview has to change. What I once deemed false is now true, and that process of open-minded inquiry has to be an ongoing thing with the coherence theory. But we can't wait for all the facts to come in. We have to make judgments about truth or falsity based on our web of beliefs, knowing that we might change our mind later. So truth is very fluid here. For example, the statement or the belief that my wife loves me. Can that ever be proven 100% true? Will I ever know that she loves me, really deeply loves me? Is there any set of facts that would let me know that with the correspondence theory? Does that mean I have to withhold judgment? Oh, I don't know if my wife loves me or not. I don't know if that's true or not. That seems odd. And so the coherence theory says, no, if everything in your life, everything seems to support the notion that your wife loves you, then that fits. It coheres. We call it true. Now, again, over time, that might have to change, but you certainly don't have to wait until you know the objective truth, which, how would I ever know? This is an internal state of another person. I might never know the objective truth, but I can have a good sense of it with the coherence theory. Some other examples, right? Maybe morality. Divorce is wrong. Let's say that someone believes that. Divorce is immoral. Is there any factual information that we could correspond that belief to reality? Could we use the correspondence theory there? But it's too important. Can we simply withhold judgment? Well, I don't know if divorce is immoral or not. Don't we have to make moral judgments, even if we don't have facts to correspond it to reality? And the coherence theory says, well, yes, with moral truths, with moral claims, you take this notion, divorce is immoral, and you relate it into your web of beliefs. For instance, you might say, I'm a Christian. I have a Christian perspective and worldview. And in my Christian worldview, divorce is not okay unless there's something like abuse or adultery. And so you've got a worldview, and you can take this now and deem it true or false using the internal movement to your worldview, right? And this can be very helpful. Of course, over time, your view of divorce might change. New information might come along, new way of interpreting scripture or something. So you're still open-minded, but you've got something to work with to determine truth or falsity. Again, in the coherence theory, truth is more fluid. There's a temporary element to it. There's a probabilistic element to truth because I can only see the world from my perspective, and my perspective is constantly changing. So truth will change in light of that. A key here is that truth is not purely subjective with the coherence theory. Some worldviews are better than others, okay? So we need to make good worldviews. We need to construct good worldviews, good webs of belief. An example might be if a car accident took place and you interviewed 3 people and they were talking about the red car and the blue car and who was responsible and whatnot, and then person number 4 seems to be somewhat intoxicated and says what they saw were a bunch of monkeys juggling, the police officer is not going to say, oh, well, everything's a matter of perspective, so this person's worldview is just as good as these others. No, 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 no. Some worldviews are better than others. Some worldviews are more educated. Some worldviews have more experience attached. Some worldviews are more open-minded. Some worldviews can take multiple perspectives into account. And so some worldviews are better than others. If we're going to use the coherence theory, we've got to make our worldview stronger. And to do this, we want to have an internally consistent worldview. So you don't want to hold a bunch of beliefs that contradict with each other. That would be an inconsistent worldview, and that would be a problem. You want to have a comprehensive worldview. That is a broad worldview, a broad perspective People, again, who have been educated, who travel, who have access to all kinds of different perspectives, creates a better worldview. You want to have a worldview that can connect to lots of other things we believe to be true about science, medicine, technology, human nature, religion, morality. The more we can connect with those things, the better. So this is the real challenge of the coherence theory. Some worldviews are better than others, so we need to construct good worldviews. Okay. The third theory of truth that we're going to cover, and the final one, is called the pragmatic theory of truth. And this is much less technical. It's pretty straightforward, actually. The pragmatic theory of truth simply says if something works, then it's true. Pragmatism is, give me what's the end result? What's the bottom line? Just lay it out for me, right? And so this view says, what gives me the results I'm looking for, that is what is true. Okay? The pragmatic theory is even more subjective, because how we deem whether something works or not, whether something gives us the results we want or not, is going to be up for interpretation, right? So there's going to be subjectivity here. By works, the pragmatist means produces certain results. Here, usefulness is a key element in truth, right? Is this useful? Does this help me? This also suggests that truth is quite relative. What works today might not work tomorrow. Similarly, what works for one group or several groups might not work for others. So there is relativism. Now, it's not purely relative. I can't just believe anything I want, right? If I go around telling everybody that I'm Abraham Lincoln, and I say, well, that's true for me, it's not going to get the results I'm looking for. I'm probably going to be ostracized, potentially locked up, right? I'm going to isolate myself. It's going to produce negative results. So we can't just make truth whatever we want. However, there is an openness here. So for instance, what makes a scientific theory true? Some would argue science describes reality accurately. That would be the correspondence theory of truth as it relates to science. But the pragmatic theory says, well, science, we don't know if science gives us an accurate view of reality. Remember, science once thought the world was flat, now it's round. Science used to think the smallest pieces of matter were atoms. Now we know about quarks, neutrinos, and subatomic particles. Some think that there are tiny strings that make up reality. So science doesn't tell us about reality as it is or describe it accurately. The reason science is true is because it gives us results. Science equips us to go to the moon. Science provides technology that works, medicine that heals us. The truth of science is in the results, not in the describing reality accurately. And that's the pragmatic theory. The pragmatic theory when it comes to morality. Well, we don't know about morality in some objective sense. The idea is, do certain moral principles lead to peace, good consequences, feeding the poor, stability, right? Safety. If certain moral principles help us get along better, help society function better, well then they give us the results and they are true. Those moral principles are true. Moral principles that lead to strife, conflict, death, they would be false. So it's all about what it produces, right? So I hope this helps, right? These three theories. The pragmatic theory, we've got a more relative view. The coherence theory is a middle ground. Truth is objective, but humans can only know that truth subjectively. And then the correspondence theory, which says truth is objective and we can know it objectively, right? And then there are methods for doing so. If you have any questions at all, please let me know. I want to help in some way. I know truth is difficult.